Today, we're going to talk about the story of a man who was once called a titan in his field. I mean, his name, Sir Jadunath Sarkar, commanded incredible respect all around the world.
And look, that's not just my opinion, that's a direct quote. People who knew his work put him at the very, very top. His scholarship was seen as totally foundational, setting a brand new standard for rigor and honesty in how India's past was studied.
Which of course brings us to the big question, right? How does a figure that important, a real giant, pretty much vanish from public memory? Let's dive into his story, his rise, and the really complex reasons he's not a household name today.
Okay, first things first. To understand the fade, you have to appreciate just how high he climbed. And Sarkar's reputation, well, it wasn't just local, it was global.
Now, for anyone who's studied history, names like Mommsen and von Ranke are absolute legends. They're the guys who basically turned history into a modern science in Europe. So, being put in the same sentence as them, that tells you everything you need to know about how highly his peers thought of him.
So, where did this giant of history come from?
Well, his path wasn't exactly what you'd call conventional. Before we go any further, let's just quickly nail down this key term, historiography. It sounds a little academic, but it's really just the history of history. It's all about understanding that the way we tell stories about the past actually changes over time, and Jadunath Sarkar was a huge force in changing how Indian history was written.
Sarkar's life really spanned a wild time in Indian history. He was born way back in 1870 under British rule, was a brilliant student, rose to become Vice-Chancellor of Calcutta University, and was even knighted for his contributions. He lived all the way to 1958, passing away just over a decade after India gained its independence.
Now here's the amazing part. He didn't even start out as a historian. His field was English literature. But he had this incredible passion for the past that drove him to teach himself Persian, which was the language of the Mughal Empire. Why would he do that? Simple. He was determined to go right to the source, to read the original documents for himself, not just trust someone else's translation.
And this absolute dedication to primary sources, well, it let him build a body of work that was, to put it mildly, staggering.
His major works were just monumental. I mean, he wrote 5 entire volumes just on the Emperor Aurangzeb, another 4 on the decline of the Mughal Empire. These were not light reads, you know. They were deeply researched, exhaustive studies that became the definitive books on these topics for generations.
And this is what made him so different. At a time when a lot of historical writing was more, let's say, poetic or nationalist, Sarkar brought this new scientific rigor. He was all about the facts, the dates, the administrative records he pulled straight from original manuscripts. This data-driven way of doing things was a total revolution.
So if his work was so groundbreaking, we have to come back to our main question: why did his star start to fade? Well, the answer lies in the nature of history itself. The simple fact that the questions we ask of the past are always changing.
After Sarkar passed away in 1958, the world of historical scholarship was really changing. New ideas were coming in, new priorities were taking shape. Historians started to look at the past through totally different lenses, and they began asking questions that Sarkar's work honestly just wasn't designed to answer.
Here's the shift in a nutshell. Sarkar was the king of top-down history. He focused on the emperors, the battles, the administration. But these new schools of thought, like Marxist and post-colonial history, they were much more interested in bottom-up questions. They wanted to know, what was life like for a regular farmer? How did economics shape society? They wanted to hear the voices of the people who weren't kings and generals.
And we get a pretty clear window into his own thinking from his personal letters. In this one from 1945, he couldn't be clearer. For him, his entire life's work was the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. Everything else, even a figure as huge as Shivaji, was just secondary to that one big project.
And you know, that intense focus eventually became a magnet for criticism. Some later scholars argued that by putting the Mughal court at the absolute center of his story, his work didn't always give enough attention to the regional powers and different viewpoints that existed outside that imperial bubble. But academic debates are only part of the story. Because no matter how interpretations shift, Jadunath Sarkar left an undeniable and seriously lasting footprint.
Throughout his life, his work got him the highest honors imaginable: a knighthood from the British, honorary memberships in the most elite historical societies in London and Washington. It just speaks volumes about the global respect he earned.
His legacy is physical too. His home in Calcutta, along with his entire massive library of priceless documents, he donated to the state. Today, it's the Jadunath Bhavan Museum and Resource Center. a real living place where his work of digging into the past can be carried on by new generations. And this, really, is his lasting value. While new historians might ask different questions, the incredibly meticulous, foundational research that Sarkar did, all that painstaking work of gathering and analyzing original documents, that remains an absolutely priceless resource for anyone studying that period.
Ultimately, the story of Jadunath Sarkar is a great reminder that history is a living conversation, not just a bunch of facts carved in stone. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. What happens when the historian, the person writing the story, becomes a part of the story themselves, subject to the very same reinterpretations and shifting views as the figures they studied?